Before I talk about struts, I would like to talk about a design pattern. What all design patterns we learned earlier? Singleton pattern, comment pattern, factory pattern, proxy pattern, and decorator pattern. Yesterday I told about facade pattern. Facade pattern. We discussed about the ideas, right? Today I am going to introduce you one more pattern related to web applications, especially MVC. MVC pattern. M stands for model, V stands for view, C stands for controller. Model, view, controller. Right? So let me start with history. Earlier, when servlets and JSP was introduced, especially when JSP were introduced, people were very happy. We can write Java code inside a JSP, right? People were writing a lot of JSPs with Java code inside. They forgot. They thought, why to write a servlet? Because JSP is again a servlet. It's converted to a servlet. So they started writing everything in a JSP, but found a difficulty. If we write Java code inside JSP, the code is not so easy to debug. If it is a Java code, you know how to debug by keeping a breakpoint, but you cannot debug a JSP. If you are writing Java code inside a JSP, it is not so easy to debug, right? So in order to avoid Java code inside JSP, they introduced something. What is it? Tags. So you can use tags and totally avoid Java code by using tags. We understood about JSTL. What is JSTL abbreviated? Java standard or JSP standard? JSP standard tag library. JSP standard tag library. So they introduced a tag library which will contain a commonly used tags. So by using tags we can avoid, and you know we can write our own custom tags also, right? So people thought, okay, if I write Java code inside JSP, it's difficult to debug. Then they thought, whenever there's a business logic, they thought, okay, we'll write a custom tag which will handle that business logic, right? But then writing custom tags is not so easy. Made a lot of mistakes for writing custom tags. So if you are just using JSPs alone with custom tags, you have to write a lot of custom tags. Again, that's not a good idea. So then the experts suggested, okay, use a combination of servlets and JSPs as we discussed and we have done. So the experts say, whenever a request comes, let the request come to a servlet. Servlet will call the service method. The business logic will be contained in service classes. Servlet will call the services. Services will call the DAOs. Business logic is executed. After your business logic is executed, you want some data to be displayed. So what you do is you keep that data, whatever you want to display, in any one of the scope. How many scopes are there in servlet? Servlet. In servlet there will be request, session, application. In JSP there is one more. Page context. Page context is set. Page scope. Okay. So you set it in one of the scope and forward to JSP, JSP will display it. So then we understood that JSPs should be used only for writing presentation logic. Don't write business logic, right? So all our presentation logic will be in JSPs now, right? The experts introduced an architecture called as Model 1 architecture. According to Model 1 architecture, what they say is all the presentation logic should be in JSPs. So your application is nothing but a lot of JSPs. Of course, business logic is there in servlets, but presentation logic is only in JSPs. So if you are writing an application, your application will have a lot of JSPs, right? and each JSP will be having some links or some submit buttons, right? So let's say we are having some links. If I click on this link, I want to go to this page. If I click on this link, I want to go to this page. So to write links in your JSP, what tag do you use? Anchor tag, anchor href, ahref, right? But when we are using ahref, we have to give the URL or URI of the next JSP. So we will be hard coding the JSP names inside the JSP. What is the next JSP name? This JSP name is hard coded inside this JSP. This JSP, when I click on this link, it should go to this JSP, right? The name of this JSP is hard coded here. When I click on this, it should go to here. The name of the JSP is hard coded here. Tomorrow, if I want to change the name of a JSP, I may have to change a lot of pages. Because to come to this page, I may come to this page from various other pages, right? I may have hard coded the link for this page in some 10 pages. If I just change the name of one JSP tomorrow, I may have to update a lot of pages, right? People were happy with model 1 architecture, but found that model 1 architecture is again having problems, right? So we say that model 1 is page centric. Model 1 architecture is page centric because if I have a page, from this page, where to go next is hard coded inside the JSP. If I click on this link, where it should go is hard coded inside the JSP. Tomorrow, if I want to change the flow of my application, I have to change the JSP, right? So experts found that model 1 architecture is not good, and they introduced model 2 architecture, right? Okay, before I go to model 1 architecture, explain me about model 1 architecture, what you understood. Another name given for model is value object. We discussed VIVO. Or another name given is TO. What is TO? Transfer object, or we call sometimes it as DTO, data transfer object. Or model, anything are same, right? Okay, let me tell you one more thing. There are two types of models. I talked about type 1. Type 1 model is a class which will contain, which can hold data, like VIVOs. These are model. Type 2 model is any class which contains business logic is also called as a model. Can I call my service classes as a model? My service classes are type 2 models. So to summarize, models are of two types. Any class which is object of any class which is used to carry data, hold data, is a model. That means any class which contains private variables, sets and getters is called as a model. Second type of model is a class which contains business logic. That means services are our second type of. And coming to V in MVC, V stands for view. V stands for view, and view is something which will contain only presentation logic. Tell me, what is a view? JSP can be a view. So basically, it can be anything. A JSP can be a view, or your application may generate a PDF. If you click on a link, you are downloading a PDF. You may generate a PDF dynamically, right? PDF can be a view. Excel sheet can be a view. Anything which contains some presentation logic can be a view. But 99% of the times we are using JSP as a view, right? And in the market there are some alternate view technologies. JSP is one of the view technology. JSP is a page where we can write presentation logic, right? In the market there are other technologies also, like velocity. Velocity is another presentation layer technology. Just like JSP, You can write a file ending with VL, velocity, right? But that's not a part right now. Just understand, there are a lot of new technologies. JSP is the one which is popular being used. Okay, then what is C? C is a controller. Let me elaborate about controller. Controller is a class which contains the control logic of my application. My application might be having a lot of pages. If I click on a particular link, where the control should go next? What business logic to execute? Whenever I click on a link, whenever a request comes to your application, some business logic has to be executed. What business logic to execute when a request comes? For this particular request, what business logic to execute? After executing the business logic, what is the view to be displayed? Everything is decided by a controller. Right? A controller can be anything which contains control logic, control flow of my application is decided by a controller. Right? Generally, we can use a servlet as a controller. Right? In my web.xml, if I give URL pattern my servlet as /star, for servlets we give URL patterns. I'll give for my servlet /star. Star means all requests will come to servlet, right? And this servlet, based on the request URI, it can decide what is the business logic to be executed. After executing the business logic, based on the output of the business logic, it may decide what is the JSP to be displayed next. Right? Generally, we use servlets as a controller, or we can use filters also as a controller. Can I configure a filter to receive all the requests? Yes, for my filter, if I use /star, every request will first come to filter before even coming to servlet. So generally, we can use either servlet as a filter, a servlet as a controller, or a filter as a controller. So in MVC architecture, they tell your control flow of your application should be centralized in a single servlet. For the whole application, there should be only one servlet, which will decide what business logic to execute, and based on the output of your business logic, what JSP to display. Right? So MVC is a design pattern. Right? Now, if I follow MVC design pattern, these design patterns are given by experts out of their experience. So if I follow this design pattern, my application may be good. Right? So what I'll do is, right now, I will show you a simple application which is using this MVC pattern. I write my own controller right now. Right? I will not write code. I have ready my application just for explaining you how to write a simple controller and what do I exactly mean by M, V and C. To just demonstrate you, to give an idea, I have ready made example here. I just import it and I'll show you. Just keep seeing. Okay, I started with a new workspace. You need not do this. I started the new workspace. I am just adding my Tomcat also quickly. 01 servlet as controller. In this application, I am going to use servlet as controller. Okay. So I have some code here. I'll just copy paste and I'll explain you what it is here. Yep. So I'm done with this. So inside WebInf, first thing, whenever you are given a web application, the first thing which you have to see is always web.xml. Tomorrow I think you'll be going into projects. They are not mini projects, they are already developed. So you'll be given code and ask you to look. The first point to start up is to look at web.xml. Okay? Okay, now see here, web.xml. Inside this web.xml, I have configured a servlet called as controller servlet. I have written this servlet, and all the URL patterns ending with .action. This is my convention. Anything ending with .action should go to controller servlet, right? I can use start.mygis, anything, but right now I took .action to be going to controller servlet. Then, as I said, whenever a request comes to your application, all the requests should go to a controller, right? But what if you have placed your JSPs outside WebInf? Generally, we used to place JSPs outside WebInf, is it? So something outside WebInf can be directly accessed. If you are giving a request to JSP, the request will not come to your servlet controller. It will directly go to JSP. So I want to restrict and say that JSPs cannot be accessed directly. So what I did is I kept a security constraint. I think you know this. Login config is I am saying basic authentication, and here I am saying for the URL pattern /JSP/star. I am not even giving the roles. I'm just saying these are secure, right? Nobody can access. If I just do it like this, nobody can access it, right? Okay, so I'll just give a request to a JSP. See, I have a JSP called as productform.jsp. I'll just give a request to this JSP. Let us see what will happen. What is it saying? Access to the request resource has been denied because I said /JSP/star. I have kept a security constant on it. Right? I have not actually configured usernames and password. If I just give a security constant, it will not allow. Right? 403 I got access to the request because has been denied. Now, see here, I wrote in my web.xml in controller servlet, all the requests ending with .action will be coming to controller servlet. Let me show you this controller servlet. Controller servlet is a one which is existing, which is extending HTTP servlet. In that I have both do get, do post. Both methods I am calling. Another method called as process, because I want same logic to be executed whether get request or post request, right? Okay, so process, what is this doing? Request dot get request URI, it gives the URI, right? So see here, I'll just give from my browser. From my browser, I'll give product_input dot action. Is it ending with action? Yes. It will go to controller. What is the URI in this? Tell me. 01 servlet controller / product_input action is URI, request URI. So see my logic. Once I press enter, the request will go to controller, and in the controller, see the logic. I am getting the request URI. URI dot last index of slash. Last index of slash means I will get the index of this slash, right? Then URI dot substring. Substring starting index is last index dot +1. right? I'll get the last part, product underscore input dot. So I took that in a variable called as, and I'm saying if action dot equals product underscore input dot action, there is no business logic. Here I am deciding what is the business logic to execute. Right? I just want to show that page. Right? If product underscore input dot action, then there is nothing to be done. But if it is product underscore save dot action, there is some business logic to be done. Okay, that's the next step. So here there is no business logic to be done. Then coming down, here again, see here, if action is product underscore input action, I am taking a string called dispatch URL. It's pointing to product form dot JSP. Else, if it is save underscore action, the dispatch URL is product details dot. If dispatch URL is not null, I am dispatching it to the dispatch URL, right? So if I give a request for product underscore input dot action, what is the JSP display? Product form dot JSP will be displayed. So I'll just give a request. So I'll just copy paste here and give it here. Firefox. Okay, see, I gave a request to product underscore input dot action. I got that product form dot JSP displayed. Right. So let me show you this product. This JSP page. What is this JSP page? It is product form dot JSP, present in JSP folder. This is the one in JSP folder, product form dot JSP, right? What is it doing? It's just having a form. In that it is asking for product name, description, price, submit, reset buttons, and once I submit it, it will go to product underscore save dot, right? So now I'll just submit it. Let's see what will happen. I'll give product name as laptop. Description is, say, I'll say my laptop is compact. Price is some 40,000. Add product. If I click on it, it will go to product underscore save dot action, right? See what is happening when I give a request product underscore save dot action. Again, it's ending with dot action. So again the request will go to controller. So it will go here. Now see again, if the action is product underscore save dot action, what am I doing? I'm creating an object of a class called as product. Then getting request parameter product name, set product name, set description, set price. I'm creating a product object with all the request parameters, right? And here I can do some business logic. Product dot save. Maybe I want to save that project. Save that product, right? Calling some business logic, some method, right? So here business logic is executed. After business logic is executed, I want to display the product details. So what am I doing? I am setting that attribute in request, product in request, and then again coming here. If action is equals to this one, this is. Now it is. What is the JSP display? Product details dot JSP. So let me show you what is this product details dot JSP. It is just using expression language to display product dot product name, product dot description, product dot price, right? Nothing much here is an example, but it will get you started to understand how a controller works. I wrote my own controller, right? In this controller, I wrote my own logic. What is this controller doing? Based on the URI, it is deciding what business logic to execute. And same based on the URI, it is deciding which JSP to display. So every request will come through controller, and controller is deciding the business logic and the next JSP. Right? So now all the control flow logic is inside the controller, right? So if a newcomer comes to my application and he wants to understand the flow of my application, if he just sees the controller code, will he be able to understand? Yes, because here only everything is there. when a request comes, what business logic to execute and what JSP to be displayed inside the control, right? So if you are following this MVC model, is this following MVC? What is model here? Product. Product is a class which is having product is a class which is having private variables getters and setters, and also it's having a business logic. It's having some business logic. Here I didn't actually write. It will be having some business logic to add database, right? So it's a model. What is the view? JSP is the view. Controller is there. So this application is following MVC design pattern. So if you are writing your applications following MVC design pattern or Model 2 design pattern, both are same. Model 2 is also called as, then it is very good for maintenance. Definitely after development your project will go to maintenance support, right? That will be very good for a person to understand the logic flow of your application, right? So this is a better pattern to be used in web applications, right? But there is a small problem here. As you already know, I am too lazy. I don't want to write my own controller. I don't want to write my own controller. If there is a ready-made controller, yes, I am very happy. I will use that controller, right? So what I want is, I want some ready-made controller. There is a person called as McClanahan in around 2000s, 1999, 2000, somewhere around that, actually around 1999 I guess, 1999, 2000, that this person McClanahan has invented a framework called as Struts framework. Initially it was called as Struts 1.x version. He invented Struts 1.x version. Struts. This is a framework which gives me a ready-made controller and some ready-made tags. What do I mean by framework? It provides some ready-made services, right? So framework is nothing but has a lot of ready-made classes or some tags which will provide me some service. I need not start coding from the low level. I can start coding from the high level. So all the low level work is taken care by a framework, right? Struts is a framework mainly concentrating on C, the controller. Struts does not concentrate. Struts does not say what should be your model, because you are the person who is writing your business logic. Struts does not say about M. Struts does not say about B. It is only about C. Struts is a framework which gives us a ready-made controller, and this controller will do a lot of things for us. Lot of things. Our life is becoming easier. We need not do a lot of. We can avoid a lot of code if I am just using the controller given by Struts. Struts is a project of Apache. It is actually Apache Struts. Apache is a big company which has a lot of products. Struts is one of the products of Apache. This person McClanahan has created Struts and donated to Apache Software Foundation. Apache Software Foundation is an open source foundation where they are developing a lot of open source projects. So Struts is Apache Struts. This Struts ruled the market for almost some 8 to 9 years. It ruled the market. Every project was using Struts. But after some 2005, 2006, lot of other frameworks came into market like JSF, Spring framework, etc., which are competitors to Struts, and Struts started losing its market because these other frameworks are providing much more facilities than what are provided by Struts. Then they thought, okay, we will redesign our Struts framework. Otherwise, nobody is going to use it in future. So they started redesigning Struts framework. Earlier framework version was Struts 1.x. It came up to 1.3.8. The last version which was released was 1.3.8, I guess. 1.3.x, I'll say. But after that, they stopped Struts1 because they introduced Struts2. Struts2 is not a new version of Struts1. Struts1 and Struts2 are totally different. So now we are going to concentrate on Struts2, right? Struts2 is a brand new framework, not in any way related to Struts1. When these people are writing Struts2, they thought, should we again create a framework from scratch? No. Struts is anyway open source framework, right? Already in the market, there is a framework called as WebWork. WebWork, which was already having some very good functionality, which these people in Struts2 want to develop. They wanted to develop something, but WebWork framework is already having almost all those functionalities. So what the thought is they thought, okay, we will use WebWork inside Struts. They purchased WebWork, right? And Struts2 was developed on the top of WebWork framework, right? Any doubts till now? This is my own controller where I have hard coded everything, right? Instead of hard coding, if my controller can read from an XML file, right? Here I have hard coded if action is equal to product input dot action, because I have only two actions, input action and save action. Because I had only two actions, I hard coded. But if I am writing a generalized controller, what I can do, I can make my controller to read from an XML file. Based on XML configuration, this can decide what business logic to execute and what JSP to display, right? So this can be called general controller, right? So that is general Struts. They have written a controller which will read XML configuration and then do everything, right? Okay. Any other doubts? Right. So let me talk about how Struts2 will work. Before I talk about what Struts2 will work, let me tell you, in Struts1, the C is a servlet, controller is a servlet, but they thought in Struts2 they don't want to use servlet as a controller because there are some drawbacks of using controller as a servlet. Whenever I give a request, if the request is going to static content, if I give a static request, will the call come to the web container at all? Web server only will send the response, right? Suppose if I give a request to a CSS file, generally CSS files, where do we keep, outside web content or outside web INF or inside web INF? Outside web INF, static content, CSS. So I have kept my CSS outside my web content, right? If somebody wants to really hack, what they can do, they can actually directly give a request to CSS file. If I am using servlet as my controller, I don't have the control of whether to accept this request or reject this request, right? So servlet, whenever a static request is coming, the request will not come to a servlet. But if it is a filter, even if you are giving a request to HTML file or CSS file, the request will come to filter. Then only it will go to HTML or CSS, right? Even static requests will come to filter, right? So in filter you can write some logic which may conditionally allow the request to some static requests or deny the request to static requests also, right? So advantage of filter over servlet is your filter is invoked even for static requests also, right? Any doubts? So that you can filter your static requests also, right? Okay, let me show you if I have to use a filter as my controller, how do I write? Before I actually show you the code for Struts, I'll show you if I'm using filter as my controller. I'll just create a new project. Just see this also. 02 filter as controller. Same application but using filter. Just see this. Okay, so I have here the code. Just copy paste. And then I'll go to web content. I'll just copy paste all this. Yep. Now see here. In web.xml, what I did is I configured a filter, no servlet now. Slash star. Every request will come to filter now. Even if I give a request for CSS file also, it will come to filter. Now see the code inside the filter. Filter is implementing filter, as you know already. In this do filter, see, same logic. Again I am getting the request URI. If request URI ends with dot action, then it will go here. Else, coming to else part, if the request URI is not starting with dot action, if it is having, if the index of /css is not equals to -1, that means in the URI there is /css. That means you are trying to act something in CSS folder. What am I doing? Response dot send error. What is the response code? sc dot forbidden. Forbidden means you will get 403 forbidden. So if you are trying to access CSS files or anything, you will get, you will be forbidden. You will not be allowed to access, right? So in filter I have this, I can take this extra step to do that. I cannot do this inside a servlet because if something for static content is coming, it will not even come to servlet, right? So if I am using filter as my controller, I will be able to write some code which will dynamically check whether the static request also can be allowed or not, right? This code is same again. If the product is this one, same like in paper. So just understand, using filter as a controller has advantages over servlet as a controller. So in Struts2, they decided we will use filter as a controller, not a servlet, right? Let's start with Struts2 now. What I want to do is I want to do a similar application in Struts2. My first page is, it will ask for product details like this. Once I submit, it should display, it should save the product in database and it should display the details of the added product, right? That's the same application which I'm going to do, right? So let's do it step by step. I will show you the steps. First follow, then I'll ask you to do it, okay? There are some steps. For the first program, if you understand the flow, then Struts is very, very easy. Very, very easy. Already you have understood the concept of interchapters in InJB, right? Inner concept of interchapters. In Struts2, there are a lot of pre-built interchapters which will do a lot of work for us. Okay, I'll show you all the details, but just I'm creating a new project. I'll give you time for doing it. Just listen for some time. I'll try to write all the code. 03 Struts2 demo. Next. So the first thing what we have to do is we have to copy the libraries required for Struts framework. Struts framework is nothing but it is giving us some set of functionality. That means we need to add the Struts related jars into the environment. The first step I'll do is to copy paste the jars. From where to copy paste? I've shared you the files. I have shared you this one, Struts2.1.8.1 lib. I have extracted it, and inside the lib there are a lot of jars, right? So what you can do is you can just add all the jars into the lib. These are all the struts jars, struts related jars, right? So just copy pasting all these jars into WebINF. That is the first step, right? And I want you to tell about an important jar here, that is struts-core. There is a jar file called as struts-core. This is a core jar which is containing the most of the functionality, and this core jar might be using some other third party jars which are here, right? It's a core jar. Okay, fine. The next thing is, in web.xml I need to configure my filter, right? So I am doing my filter configuration like this. This is a simple filter. What is the filter class? arg.apache.struts2.dispatcher.filterDispatch. This is not my own class, it's given by Apache. And what I did, I gave a name called as struts2. I can give any name for my filter. And all the URL patterns / every request will be coming to filter dispatcher, right? So first step, I have configured this filter. I'll give you time for doing all this just here now. Okay. Then what I want two forms. One for displaying the JSP, which will ask me for product name, description and price, right? I'll just copy paste this product.jsp because there's nothing much here in product.jsp. I'll just explain you. See here, in this product.jsp, what I am doing is I am using a struts given library. Struts is coming up with some tag library. Instead of using plain HTML form tag, I am using a struts form tag. S:form. Action is equals to product underscore say the next action, right? And S:text field, instead of using input type is equals text, I am using label is this one and key is, right? So our simple JSP. Once I press submit, where it will go? It will go to an action called as product underscore save, right? So as I told, struts is the main component of struts is our filter dispatcher, the controller filter. That filter will read from an XML file called as struts.xml. Web.xml for web applications, right? For struts, the XML file is struts.xml, right? So I am just copy pasting the struts.xml here. I'll show you how you should do also. Struts.xml should be pasted inside source, not inside webinf or everywhere. It should be inside source. Yep, see here. The root tag, this struts.xml is following a DTD, struts2 DTD. Root tag is struts. And here I have a package. I just gave a name to this package. Right now, just forget about what is this namespace and just understand that it is extending something called as struts-default. Forget about this for now. I'll explain you once you see the output. Right? And inside that I am writing an action. If the action name is product underscore input, then there is no business logic to be executed for this action. Just the result should be slash JSP slash product underscore product dot. So if I give a request product underscore input dot action, by default the extension which is expected by Struts2 is dot action. If I give a request ending with product underscore input dot action, this page will be displayed simply. Right? Next, once I submit this JSP, where is it going? It's going to product underscore save. Right? See here, in my source, I'll just copy paste this code also. See what this is doing. Here I have only one class, product.java. It's having corresponding fields, product name, description, price. These names are exactly same as the whatever I gave in form. Once I submit, it's going to product underscore save, and I have a class called as product which is having same variable setters and getters, and inside this class I am writing a method called as execute. Here I can write all my business logic. Right now I don't have any business logic, and this execute method should return is returning string, and the return type is return value is success. Right? Now what should happen? Once I submit this form, the request will go to product underscore save dot action. By default, dot action will be added because you are using a tag called as SQL form, not HTML tag. So once you submit, the request will go to product underscore save dot. Now see what I have configured in struts.xml. For action product underscore save, the class is com.render product, and the method to be executed is execute. I exactly told. If there is some business logic to be executed, then only I am giving class and method. For this action, I didn't give class and method because for this action there is no business logic to be executed. I just wanted to display JSP. Right? If there is business logic to be executed, then only I am giving class and what is the method. So whenever a request comes for product underscore save dot action, a method called as execute will be called on this product. But before calling the execute method, what the filter will do is, filter is getting some request parameters, product name, description, price. If the request parameter names are matching the instance variable names of this class, automatically the setter methods are called. Automatically setter methods are called before calling execute. Right? So in your execute method of your product, in your business logic, you can use the values of these variables because their setter methods are called. Before calling execute, they are populated. Setter methods are called. So in your execute method, you can execute your business logic. Right? And then the method is returning success. It can return anything. Right? I am now returning success. By default, See here, in the result tag, I can say result type is equals to result name is equals to success. Whether I write name is equal to success or not, by default it is name is equal to success. That means if your business logic is returning success, this is a JSP page to be displayed, right? Inside one action tag, I can write one more result tag saying failure or whatever ABC and some x dot. If your execute method, if this method is returning success, then this is a JSP, it will be displayed. If this method is returning ABC, then this is a JSP, which will be displayed. So that is how the return type of execute method is related to the next JSP, which is right. So by default, if you just write a result tag without name attribute, the name will be by default for success, right? That's it. I'm done. Let me just give a request and check what is happening. I'll just say system.out.println saving product. System.out.println, just I'll print product name just to show you that they are populated. Plus product name. I could write any of the business logic here. I'm done. But according to Struts.xml, where is the JSP? In JSP folder, is it? /JSP /. But my JSP is here. So what I'll do is I'll just move my JSP to this one. I just have the folder structure. I'll copy paste CSS and JSP. I'll delete it. Copy paste. Here I have same thing, and once execute method returns success, it is displaying details.jsp. This details.jsp is just using a tag called SQL property. It will display a property, same properties, right? Self-explanatory. And here, as I'm using CSS to display it in the center. Now I'll just run it. Let's see what will happen. Okay, any exceptions here? Got an exception, what is it? Null pointer exception. Oh, it is actually it is integrating struts with Spring by default. Spring framework, which we will see later. It's possible to integrate struts and Spring. As Spring jars are also already present there, by default it's trying to integrate Spring with struts. So the thing is I have to remove Spring related jars, right? All the jars are not required. I'll just remove all the jars and I'll just add only the required jars. I'll give those jars also to you. Only these are the jars required. Few jars for the basic purposes. Right? Now I will again deploy it. there any other exceptions now? Oh, class not found exception. Oh, where is libbook? I copied it to outside web app. It should be inside. Okay, let's start it again. Okay. Now I'll open struts.xml and I'll give product underscore input dot action. Dot see, I got it displayed. Now I'm adding product name A, description B, and price is 1000. It is displaying the next one also, right? Just see here how Struts2 works. You actually give a request to first product underscore input dot action. All requests are coming to filter dispatcher. The filter is nothing but our controller. What happens is whenever the filter gets a request, it has to do a lot of work. This is a filter configuration. All requests will come to filter. A filter has to do a lot of things in Struts2 for providing all features. Struts2 is providing a lot of features. It has to do a lot of things, right? Since Struts has more, actually much more features to support, its filter dispatcher could grow infinitely in complexity. If all the code is written in a single filter class, it is providing a lot of features, right? For all the features you have write code, if everything is written in a single filter class, the filter class could have been very big, right? Struts approaches this by splitting the task processing into filter in its filter dispatcher into a subcomponents called as interceptors. For each service the Struts is providing, there is one interceptor. All the features provided by Struts are kept in different interceptors, right? What the filter will do? Filter will invoke all the interceptors in order. So these interceptors are providing the services. Just like in EJB3, there were interceptors. In Struts2 also, the task which the filter has to do is split into interceptors, right? So whenever Struts get a request, initially when the application is deploying, the filter will be initialized. During the initialization of filter, what is the filter name? Filter dispatcher. It will read struts.xml and it will prepare an object called as configuration manager. By reading struts.xml, it will prepare an object called as configuration manager, right? So configuration manager is already there in the memory right now. A request came to filter dispatcher. Filter dispatcher will see the configuration in struts.xml through config manager. This object is containing all the details now present in struts.xml, right? So when a request comes, the filter dispatcher will consult config manager and see, is there any action configured for this request? What is your request first? Product underscore input dot action. It will see, is there any action for product underscore input? Yes, it should be there. I'll just show you quickly. In struts.xml, is there an action? Yes, right? So what it will do is it will try to create an object of a class. Is there a class attribute for this? No, right? By default, if there is no class attribute for action, the default class is action support. There is a class called as action support. by default, if there is no class, then the class is com.opensymphony.xwork.actionSupport. The default class is this one. And is there a method attribute for the first action? No. So default method name is guess. Execute. So for any tag, if there is no class value given, the default class will be action support, and the default method will be execute method, right? So a request came for product underscore input action. The filter will ask the configuration manager, give me the action class for this corresponding action. What's the action class for this? Action support, right? An object of that action support is created, and it will try to invoke the execute method by default, right? But before the execute method of your action is created, lot of interceptors are executed. Filter will call interceptor 1, interceptor 1 will call interceptor 2, like that, lot of interceptors, and finally your action will be called, right? Which method of your action by default? Execute method. Inside execute method of action support, the return type of execute method should always be string. The execute method of action support is returning success, right? So the return value is success. After executing the execute method, the return value is success. Is there any result for success? By default, if you don't give name for this result tag, the name is success. So there is a result tag for success. This will be displayed, right? That's what has happened when you give first request, right? But I told there are a lot of interceptors executed, right? What are the interceptors? Where did I configure the interceptors? Did I configure any of the interceptors here? No, right? If you see here, we have defined our actions in a package called as training. Any name I give. Extends struts-default, right? And there is a file called as struts-default.xml, which is present inside a jar which you used, right? Inside that struts-default, this is the struts-default which is present in the jars. Now your package is extending a package called as struts-default. See here in this XML, there is a package with name struts-default. All this configuration of this package is inherited to your training package. That is the meaning of extends. Package training is extending another package called as struts-default. Where is it defined? Struts-default, right? So all the configuration which was there in struts-default package will be inherited to your package also. Instead of we writing all the common things, we are just extending it. Only the configuration is extended, is inherited, right? So let's see what is this package called as struts-default containing. I'll do is I'll just copy this to this one. Okay, here it is. This is the one. I'll just show you the package struts-default.xml. There is something called as result types. I explained all this configuration always inherited, right? Then there is a tag called as interceptors. Some interceptors are defined here. Every interceptor is having a name and a class. lot of interceptors are defined here. Then see, there is a tag called as interceptor stack. Interceptor stack is nothing but grouping of some interceptors. Group of interceptors. So there is an interceptor stack called as basic stack. Here it is having a reference to interceptor reference exception. So the interceptor is actually defined here. All the interceptors are defined here, and here it is a reference to exception. Is there an interceptor name called as exception? Yeah, see, in the stack, see, actually these are the only interceptors present. These are the interceptors present, configured. But we are grouping the interceptors using a interceptor stack. So in the basic stack, there are some interceptors, right? Exception interceptor, servlet config interceptor, prepare, checkbox, multi-select, action mapping parameters, params, lot of interceptors. I'll explain you the importance of these interceptors. But just understand, the interceptors are grouped. There is one interceptor stack called basic stack, and one interceptor stack called as validation workflow stack. For different purposes, they have defined different stacks. Validation workflow stack is having only these interceptors. File upload stack is having these interceptors. Model driven stack, chain stack, I-18 stack, this is for internationalization. We talk about internationalization. I-18 stack, like that, a lot of stacks are defined. Now coming down, there is one more stack called as params prepare param stack. Coming down, default stack. Default stack, it is again referencing to lot of interceptors, right? Now coming down, one more stack, complete stack, and at the end, what is the default interceptor reference? Default stack. So for our actions, what is the stack of interceptors which is applied by default? Default stack. What all interceptors are defined in a stack with name default stack? Coming up, see, these are the interceptors defined inside the default stack, right? So in my struts.xml, did I write, for my action, did I write any interceptor stacks? No. If I didn't write any interceptor tag here, for my action, the default stack which will be applied is default stack. For every action, I could have also written interceptor ref. I didn't write anything. That means the default stack will be applied, right? That means before invoking the execute method of my action, what all interceptors are executed? The interceptors defined in default stack. First, this interceptor is executed, then this interceptor, finally the execute method of the action is executed, right? Any doubts? Okay. There is one interceptor called as params interceptors, which is of interest right now. Params interceptor. What this will do is, it will take the request parameters. Are there any request parameters for the first action? No. Right? For second action, there are request parameters, product name, description, price. Right? So what this interceptor will do is, it will take all the request parameters and call the setter method for your action. So this is the interceptor which is responsible for populating the request parameter names inside your action. So for product, automatically the set product name, set description are called. That is done by params stack, right? So like that, each of the interceptors are having different functionalities. Right now, in our application till now, it is using params Any doubts? Right? So before your action execute method is executed, lot of interceptors are executed, and finally your execute method is called. Right? What is your execute method returning? Returning a string. String is nothing but the name of the result. Name of the result by default is success. Right? Success. So the default action class is this one, and inside that execute method is there. This execute method is returning success. So is there any result for success? Yes, this is the result, right? So this result will be displayed, right? But the result has types. This result type is dispatcher by default. Type is equals to dispatcher. If you don't give type for your result, by default the type is dispatcher. You know how to dispatch a request from a server to JSP? What? Request dispatcher dot forward for forwarding, right? If your result name is result type is dispatcher, internally filter will dispatch the request to this JSP. It can be redirect also. Type is equal to redirect hyphen action. There's one result type. What will happen if I say redirect? It will be redirected to JSP. So whether you want to forward or redirect can be decided by the type attribute. The default type is dispatcher, right? So whatever result types you are using here should also be declared. Where are they declared? Just I'm going up. See, these are the result types supported by Struts2. Here is the dispatcher, the default one. Here is there something like called as redirect, right? So result types are also configured. I talk about various things. Right now we discuss only about dispatcher and redirect, right? Any doubts till now? Before your action method is executed, what will happen is, where is the action object created? Action object is created even before invoking the interceptors. Action object is created somewhere here only, right? After action object is created, all the interceptors are executed, right? So one of the interceptors, what it will do is it will create an object called as value stack. So important thing in struts is value stack. You need to understand this value stack very clearly. So before your actions execute method is called, a value stack is created. Value stack, you can assume this to be a data structure, right? So the value stack looks like this. The value stack is again divided into two parts. One is context map and another is object stack, right? So two parts, context map, object, right? Now immediately after your action class object is created, one of the interceptors, what it will do is it will push your action object to the object stack. Okay, your action object will be pushed onto the top of action stack. So initially the value stack will be empty. Before calling your execute method, action object will be pushed here, right? So how many actions will be there in stack? In our case, whenever I call product underscore input, one value stack is created and that object is built here, and this is destroyed once the response comes back. This value stack is created per request. For every request, a value check object is created, and we are giving a request to one action, right? That action object is kept inside the top of the stack, right? I will show you later. You can give a request to one action, action 1. Action 1 can forward to action 2. Action 2 can forward to action 3, like that. I will show you how to do it. So, what is the first action? Action 1. First, action 1 will be pushed onto the stack. Then the flow is going to action 2. Action 2 also will be pushed onto the top of the stack. Action 3. The currently executing action will always be on the top of the stack. Right? So, in this object stack, the action objects will be there. Okay? Any doubts? Fine. Now, the second part. This context map contains 5 types of objects. One is request, ATTR, parameters, session, application. Any request parameters which are coming are kept inside a map called as parameters. Parameters is a map. Map means it will contain key value request. Parameters is a map. It will contain request parameter name, request parameter value. If you want to access request parameter names and values in your JSP, you can access it through this one, right? And this object can be used to access any request scope attributes. You might have set some attributes in request. If you want to access them inside JSP, you can use this request attribute. Similarly, to access session attributes, to access application scope attributes, you might have set some attributes on servlet context, you can access, right? And the last one is ATTR. ATTR can be used to search for an attribute in any one of the scope. It will start looking from the least scope, right? If you are using ATTR, this is also a map. You can use this ATTR to look for a key starting from the least, right? So before your action method is executed, this stack is created and it is populated automatically by one of the interceptors, right? Anything else? Clear? Okay, now let me explain about this particular scenario. Okay, see here. I gave a request to product underscore input dot action. Where did the request come first? To filter dispatcher, right? Is this filter dispatcher already initialized? When is the filter initialized? Tell me. When is the servlet initialized? When is the filter initialized? Servlet is generally by default initialized on first request. Or if you want the servlet to be initialized during the startup, go down startup. When is the filter initialized? When it is deployed. No, by default all the filters will be initialized when they are deployed. So when this application is getting deployed, the filter dispatcher will be initialized. In the init method of this dispatcher, it is reading struts.xml and it is preparing an object called as what? Configuration manager. Configuration manager. So now all the configuration present in struts.xml, this struts.xml is present in configuration manager, right? Here I defined a package called as training. It is extending struts-default. In struts-default, already a lot of interceptors have been defined, interceptor stacks have been defined, right? Every configuration in that package will be inherited to my package, right? Now, in my action tag, if there is no interceptor tag, what is the default interceptor applied for my action? Default stack. There is the interceptor with name default stack. In that stack, there are a lot of interceptors, right? So all those interceptors will be applied for my action, right? So a request came for product underscore input dot action. First, an object of this action support object is created. Value stack is created by one of the interceptor. The action object will be pushed onto the top of the stack, right? Then one of the interceptor, what it will do? Params interceptor will take the request parameters, populate the object. So now object, the action object is on the top of the stack, and all its instance variables are populated with request parameter values, matching request parameter values, right? Like that, all the interceptors are executed. Finally, the execute method of this action is executed. Here in this case, it returns success. Success means this is the result type matching. By default, name of the result is success. It will dispatch, the request will be dispatched to this JSP, right? In JSP, what am I using? I am using SQL form. Action is equals to product underscore save. I just what will happen is you are using SQL and text field, right? This SQL and text field, what it will do is it will see whether there is any variable called as product name on an object which is on the top of the stack. When this page is displayed initially, what is the object on the top of the stack? Action support. Right, first request. That's not having action. The default action is action support, right? It will see, is there a variable called product name there? No. If it is there, the value of it will be displayed automatically. That is the reason why we are using SQL and text input. If I had used the input type is equal to text, the value which is there on the stack will not be populated, right? So SQL and text input is a predefined tag defined in the Struts tag. What this will do is the tag handler for this tag will look for this key for this variable on an object which is on the top of the stack, right? It will search on top. If it is found, the value will be automatically populated, right? So initially there is nothing, so the thing is empty, right? Okay. So once I say add product, what is happening? Okay, server is down. I stopped. What is happening? The request is going to product underscore save. So this is the action. Product object will be on the top of the stack now. Request parameters are coming. They are populated, and then after that, my execute method, what is it returning? Success. Success means this JSP is displayed, right? In this JSP, what am I doing? I am using SQL property. What this SQL property will do is it is check for this property on the stack. It will search for this property on the, if it is there, it is there. Already before the control comes here, it is displaying, right? It's there, right? Right? This is a basic flow till now. Any doubts, let me know. I'll explain you one by one again. So for every action invocation, the filter dispatcher does the following. Consult the configuration manager to determine what action to invoke based on the request URI, right? Run each of the interceptors registered for this action. One of the interceptors will populate the action's properties, right? Then execute method of the action is called, right? Execute method is returning result string. Based on the string, the result JSP is executed and displayed. These are the steps for every action invocation, right? A Struts application uses a number of configuration files. The primary configuration files are struts.xml and struts.properties. These are the two configuration files. Actually, till now we have used only the XML file. We generally don't prefer to use properties file because everybody prefers XML. Why? Because XML which you have written can be validated according to your TTR access. That facility is there. So we always prefer to use struts.xml. We generally don't use struts.properties. Whatever I was doing in XML file, I could do the same inside properties file also. Right? And there are some other XMLs also like struts-plugin.xml, which we will discuss later. And if you are using velocity as your view technology, expect to have velocity as the properties. As I told, there are other view technologies like JSP. JSP is a view technology. Velocity is another view technology. If you are using that, you may want to configure velocity properties also. But right now we are not using velocity. Right. Interceptors and result types used in action must be registered before they can be used. Where are they registered? Happily, struts configuration files support inheritance, and the default configuration files are included in struts2 core, the jar which we extracted. The struts-default.xml file, one of such default configuration files, registers the default result types. Is struts-default where I have shown you result types and interceptors. As such, you can use the default result types and interceptors without registering them in your own struts.xml. You can just extend it, right? We have extended it. Okay, this default properties we don't use. Struts.xml. Since struts has been designed with modularity in mind, actions can be grouped into packages. In my application, if my application is too big, then we will be having some modules in our application, right? For each module, what you can do is you can create a package, right? Every package tag will have a name. What I gave package name as training, and it can extend some other package, not only this one, right? And every package can have a namespace. Till now we didn't use namespace. I'll tell you the use of namespace now. So like that, my struts.xml can have more than one packages like this. Generally, for one module, we'll create one package. Then next, a package element must have a name attribute. Namespace attribute is optional, and if it is not present, the default value will be slash. I didn't give namespace to my package. It is slash. If namespace attribute has a non-default value, then namespace must be added to the URI that invokes the actions in this package. For example, the URI for invoking an action in a package with the default namespace is this one. Application name, context means application name, slash action name dot action. That's what we have used till now. Because there is no namespace. If I have given a namespace, to invoke an action present in a non-default namespace, you can do like this. Application name slash namespace slash action name dot action. That means in my XML, if I have given a namespace is equals to say mysys, right? How to invoke this action now? Application name slash mysys slash product underscore save dot action. These are going to access it, right? So you can modularize your configuration. Each package can be treated like a module. One module will be configured inside one package, right? Every package can have a namespace. By default, if you don't give a namespace, the namespace is slash. If you give a namespace, to access an action present in this namespace, you have to use mysys slash product input dot slash, right? So that is the importance of namespace. A package element almost always extends struts default package defined in struts-default.xml. By doing so, all actions in this package can use the result types and interceptors registered inside, right? That's the reason why we are extending it. So just shows that in the struts default.xml, these are all the result types and there are a lot of interceptors. Now, if your application is too big, what you can do is you can split your XML file into multiple XML files. And inside one main XML file, in struts.xml file, what you do is you say include module1.xml, include module2. So you can split your actions into multiple XML files and include it inside the main struts.xml file by using include tag. Right? Next, an action may or may not specify a action class. Therefore, an action element may be as simple as, like our first action didn't have an action class. An action that does not specify an action class will be given an instance of a default action class. The class is action support. So, if you don't give action, the default class is action support, or you can give a class, your own class. If the class attribute is present, but the method attribute is not, execute is a method name. If you don't give method name, these and these are same. See here, there is no method name. The default method name assumed is execute. Result. Result is a sub element of action. And tell the struts where you want the action to be forwarded to. Right? Here, this action called as product underscore save is having two things: success, a result with name success, type is dispatcher. The default type is also dispatcher. Name is input, type is dispatcher. It's having two things. Suppose if your execute method is returning input, it will forward to the type attribute for result element specifies the result type. The value of type attribute must be a result type that is registered in the containing package or a parent package extended by the containing. What is the result type by default? Dispatcher. Where is the result type dispatcher defined? In struts-default in this package. If a method returns a value without a matching result element, struts will try to find the matching result under the global hyphen results element. What is this global underscore results element? See, you can write a tag called as global underscore results inside your package. Where are you writing a result tag? Inside which tag? Action tag. So there can be a lot of action tags, right? Each action tag will have result tags, but there might be some common results for multiple actions. You keep the common results in a tag called as global results. Like whenever exception occurs, you may want to display general error type. See, you can write a tag called as global results and result type, result name, right? So coming back, yeah. If a method returns a value without a matching result element, Your action method is returning something which is not matching any result element. Struts will try to find a matching result under the global result element. If no result element is found under global result, an exception will be. Right? If you omit the name of the attribute in the result element, success is implied, as I already told. If the type attribute is not present, the default result type is dispatcher is also 0. So therefore both are same. Just writing a result tag like this is equal to writing the default name is success, default type is. Now, an alternate syntax that employs param element exists for the dispatcher result. In case the parameter name to be used in the param element is so. Result tag, writing this is same as inside the result tag you can have a param call as location and you can specify a JSP. Both are same. Result tag has internally param tag can be used. Inside param you have to give a param call as location and you can specify. Both are same. The default parameter is location. Just check. Interceptor related elements. Now, an action tag, an action element must contain a list of interceptors that will process an action. For an action tag, you can give interceptor tag. Before you can use an interceptor, however, you have to register it using the interceptor elements under interceptors. Already interceptors are defined inside struts default. The interceptors defined in a package can be used by all actions in that package. Now see, in struts-default.xml there is a tag called as interceptors in which we define a name and in your action tag what you can do is you can just give a reference to the interceptor. Interceptor reference name is equal to alias. Right? In your action tag you could give interceptors like this. In your action tag you could give interceptors like this. If you don't define any of the interceptors, then what is the default interceptor applied? An interceptor with name default stack. Default stack is right, that will be applied. If you give your own interceptor tag, then that will not be applied. Right? Just analyze it. With most struts application having multiple action elements, repeating a list of interceptors for each action can be a daunting task, a big task. Right? In order to alleviate this problem, struts allow you to create interceptor stacks that group the required interceptors, then group the required interceptors into stacks. Instead of referencing interceptors from within each action, you can reference the stack entry. In action tag, instead of writing 10 interceptor tags, you can just refer to one stack, which is again group having 10 interceptors. So, see here, this is my own action. There is a stack called as basic stack. Inside my action, I can just refer to basic stack, which will include all this. The struts-default package defines several stacks. It defines a default intercept reference element that specifies the default interceptor or interceptor stack to use if no interceptor is defined for an action. In struts-default, there is a tag called as default interceptor ref. What is it referencing to? Default tag. So for your action, if you didn't specify any interceptor tag, this will be right. Next, the param element can be nested within another element such as action, result type, or intercept. You can use a param tag like this: param name line. Example here, inside action tag you can use a param called as param and value, right? So what happens is, in this class, customer class, if there is a variable which is matching this parameter name, automatically sector will be called, right? So for interceptors also, for interceptor tag also you can use a param tag. Here something exclude method. For this interceptor it's saying exclude the methods called as input, back, cancel. Constant. The last thing. In addition to struts.xml, you can have struts.properties file, as I told you. You create struts.properties if you need to override the one key value pairs present in default.properties. There is one more file called as default.properties in which there are a lot of key value pairs. If you want to override the key value pairs present, you can write struts.properties. Most of the time you won't need a struts.properties file, as the default.properties is good enough. You can override the setting in default properties file using a constant element in struts.xml. In struts.xml you can write a constant value like this. You can write some constants. In defaults.xml, in default.properties file, there are some key value pairs which are nothing but constants available, which will be used by struts. If you want to override, you can do it two ways. You can write struts.properties and keep it in SRC class, or inside struts.xml you can do like this. So we always prefer XML. In order to define constants, you can always define a constant tag. Just see and let me know if you have any doubts. Analyze this. To avoid a new struts.properties, you can use constant element in struts.xml, or alternatively, you can use init param element of the filter declaration of your struts. Inside your filter declaration of struts, you can use init param, and here you are specifying struts.development mode is true. What is this dev mode? Whenever you are developing, you may want to understand what is actually happening inside, what interceptors are executed, what each interceptors might be doing. They might be doing some logging. Those interceptors, they might be logging some information, right? During development, you may want to see the logs to understand what is happening. If you enable struts.development mode, dev mode as true, then you can see those logs written by interceptors on the console, right? This is a constant struts.development. Any doubts? That's it about the introduction. Any doubts, let me know. Yes. The next thing what I want to do is I want to tell you, suppose this is your action class, right? If you want to access a reference of request object, response object, session object, or servlet context object, what you do is you can make your class to implement some aware interfaces. You can say your product implements servlet request aware. Okay, servlet request aware, if you implement, you have to implement a method called as, what is the method? Set servlet context. If your class is, if your action class is implementing servlet request aware, automatically this method will be called by one of the interceptor and the request object will be passed, right? What you can do is you can create a variable private servlet request. What is HTTP servlet request, right? Private HTTP servlet request, and here I'll say this dot servlet request is equals to servlet. So now in your product, in your action class, you will be having a reference to servlet request, right? This setter method is called before calling your execute method. So inside your execute method, you can use this servlet request option, right? Suppose if you want a servlet response, what you can do? Guess. Implement servlet response aware interface, and you need to implement set servlet response, right? Suppose if you want session object, session aware, and you have to implement what is the method? But see this one interesting thing, set servlet request is taking HTTP servlet request, that servlet response is taking HTTP servlet response. I expect set session to take HTTP session. I am expecting it to take HTTP session, but it is taking a map. Let me tell you. Do you really require a request object and response object in action? No, because in our servlets, why do we use request object generally? To get the request parameters. Already getting request parameters and populating your action is done by one of the interceptor. Most of the times we don't want request object and we don't want response object, but sometimes I will want certain information in session. I sometimes need session object, right? So generally what we do is we don't implement request aware or response aware, but we implement servlet aware, right? But if my session object, my set session is taking HTTP servlet, HTTP session, right? This action class is using servlet API. HTTP session interface belongs to servlet API, Java x.servlet.http session. So in my action class, it is not supposed to depend on any of the specific API. We'll be having a reference to HTTP session of servlet. So they don't want it. They gave a map java.util.map, right? But who will be calling this set session? One of the interceptor will be calling set session. What object is passed is, if they will pass an object which is implementing map interface, okay, it is session map, but that object will be having implicitly the reference of HTTP session, right? So if you say map.put key value pairs, you can say map dot. Okay, what I can do is here I can take a map of string comma object. I'll say session map. Okay, here I'll say this dot session map is equals to, now in this map can I put some key value pairs? So I am actually putting an object, calling a method on an object which is implementing map. What that put method will do is it will put the attributes in HTTP session object. Okay, we are just getting an object which is acting like a wrapper to HTTP session. We will be getting a session map object which is acting like a wrapper to whatever operations I am doing on map will be done internally on HTTP session. Right? How do I access HTTP session in my JSP? In value stack there is one variable by using which I can access. What is that? In value stack, in context map, there are 5 attributes I told. Request, ATTR, session, parameters, application. Session is that to access session attribute, right? So I'll be able to access the attributes present on session by using a variable called as session present on the context, right? So if you want the reference of session in your action, you can just implement session aware interface. Okay. So last, what I'll do is I'll just go through this presentation. I have explained you the concepts that are present in this presentation, but just let me go through some of the new things will be there. So just I'll go through this presentation. An action class is a normal Java class. My action class product, is it implementing any interfaces related to struts? It's a normal POJO, normal Java class. What is POJO? Plain old Java object. Any normal Java class which is not implementing specific interface is called as a POJO, right? And what is POJI? Plain old Java interface. Any interface which is not extending any specific interface of any framework is called as a POJO. Okay, that's just a terminology being used. POJO, POJI. Okay, action class is normal Java class which follows the following rules. The property must have a get and set method, getters and setters, every property. Action class must have a no argument constructor. Why? There is a default constructor without any argument. There should be. Why? I think you got an exception, right? You got an exception. He gave a parameter as construct for product, you got an exception. Why? Who is creating object of your action? Struts, the filter. Internally, some of the interceptors are doing it, right? So if your class is not having default constructor, it has to pass parameters. How does it know what parameters to pass? It does not know, right? So it will always try to invoke default constructor with no argument. So your action class should have no argument constructor. Action class must have at least one method that will be invoked when action is. An action class may be associated with multiple actions. In our action class we have only one execute method, right? My action class can have multiple methods. Like suppose I gave an assignment for adding an employee, deleting an employee, editing an employee, right? What you could do is you can write an action class called as employee. In that you can say, you can write a method called as add, which will add an employee. Delete, which will delete an employee. Edit, which will edit an employee. Like it. So one action class can have multiple methods, right? In action tag, what are you specifying? Method to be invoked also you are specifying, right? So for adding, you can give one URL. For deleting, you can give one URL, one action tag. For editing, you can give one action tag. For all 3 action tags, what is the class? Same. Methods? So that means an action class may be associated with multiple actions. Like adding is one action, deleting is one action, editing is one action. One action class can be associated with multiple actions, right? So one action, there are 3 action tags which are using same action, right? But different methods are involved. In this case, action class may provide different methods for each example. For example, user action class may have a login and logout methods that are mapped to user underscore login action and user underscore logout action. Okay. Since Struts2, unlike Struts1, creates a new action instance for every HTTP request, action class does not have to be thread safe. For every new request, a new action object is created. Action objects are not shared by two threads. Whereas in Struts1, they were shared. So in Struts1, you need to take care of thread safety. But in Struts2, for every action, for every request, a new action object is created. So you need not worry about thread safety. Struts2, unlike Struts1, by default does not create an object of HTTP session. Right? This I will show you later. Okay, next see the concept. Action class does not have to extend a certain parent class or implement an interface. My previous action product was not extending anything, right? Most of your action classes will implement interface called as action interface and indirectly extending a convenience class called as your class actually need not implement any interface or action anything, but you can implement interface called as action, but don't implement action interface because action interface is having lot of methods. You can extend a class called as action support, which is implementing action. So you can extend action support if you want, and you can override whatever methods you want. Right? If your requirements are straightforward, simple requirements, then your class need not extend. But there are some requirements like validation. You may want to validate user input. In such cases, you want some default functionality to be inherited. In some cases where you don't want basic functionality, you can extend action support. If you implement action interface, you will inherit following static fields. Static field success indicates that action was successful and the result view should be shown to user. Actually, in my execute method I was running, success says that the action was executed successfully and the result view should be shown. None indicates that action execution was successful, but no result view should be shown to user. Sometimes we don't want to show any view to the user. Just want to execute some logic. The same view will be displayed again. Same JSP will be there sometimes. So in that cases, you can just specify none. Error indicates that action execution failed, and an error view should be sent to user. If your execute method is returning error, then which result will be displayed? A result with name error will be displayed. A result tag name is equals to error will be displayed if your execute method is running this one. Input. If your execute method is returning input, then a result tag may have name is equals to input that will be. Login indicates that the action could not execute because the user was not logged in, and the login view will be shown. A view, a result with name login will be shown. Right? So these constants are defined inside action class. Right? While returning, you can just return them. What do I exactly mean? See here, my product extends, I'll say action. That means is it implementing action interface? So it could have got a static variable called as success. Now I'll say just Some of you have typed a spelling mistake. Capital S you give. Is a small s. So why to type? It's always better to use some constant. There's a constant which is defined inside action interface. You can just written that. Just to avoid spelling mistakes, we have defined some standard constants inside action interface. Right? As I have told, from an action class, you can access resources such as servlet context, HTTP session, request, and servlet response objects by implementing aware interfaces like servlet request aware, session aware, and all. Or there is another alternative. There are two classes that provide access to the before mentioned resources. One is action context and one other is servlet action context. The latter, servlet action context, wraps the former and is easier to use between the two. So we can use this servlet action context to get the reference of request, response, session, server. See, this servlet action context provides these methods like get request, get response. They are static. So in your action classes, what you can do, you can call the static methods and you will be able to get the request, response, and servlet context objects just like this. See? Servlet action context dot get request. I got request of get session. I got. Right? So you need not implement aware interfaces. The alternative is to use this servlet action context dot get request, get session, get response. Right? As I told, these are the aware interfaces. Servlet context aware, servlet request aware, response aware, session aware. If you need to access HTTP session object within your action, implementing session aware interface is a way to go. Implementing session aware does not give you the current HTTP session but an instance of map. In an implementation, set session method which we assign like this would be writing set session like this. Struts will pass an instance of session map which extends Java little abstract map which is internally implementing map. So session map present in arg.apache.struts.dispatcher.session map is implementing map. Session map is a wrapper to the current HTTP session object and maintains the reference of HTTP session. It's just a wrapper as I told you, session map. Right? Here are the public methods defined inside. One method is invalidate. If you want to invalidate your session, you can call session map dot invalidate. Internally it will call HTTP session dot invalidate. If you want to invalidate your session. Right? Another one is entry set. You can call entry set. Returns a set of attributes from HTTP session. In HTTP session, you might be having attribute name and attribute value. Everything will be written as a set of attributes. Right? And there's a method called as get. If you pass key, attribute name, it will give you attribute value. So you can have a method called as put, store the session attribute. If you put an attribute inside your map, it will be internally keeping an attribute inside HTTP. So what I want to say is session map is just a wrapper to HTTP. For session aware interface to work, there is an interceptor called as servlet config interceptor. this is the interceptor which is making the session aware interface to work, right? If this interceptor is not present in the stack, session aware interface will not work. But since this interceptor is part of default stack, by default this is already on, right? Now last few things. Request parameters are mapped to action properties, right? If any request parameters are coming, then automatically corresponding settlements are called automatically, right? However, there is another way of assigning values to action properties by using a param tag. I told you this param tag earlier. If you are using a param tag inside action, you are hard coding some values inside your action class. If there is a variable called site ID in your action class, that site ID will be called. Right? Each param element corresponds to an action process. So how is this happening? There is an interceptor called as static params interceptor. It is responsible for mapping these static parameters to action properties. This is the interceptor behind mapping these static properties to action properties. Just analyze it. Next, this I have already done. This we have already seen. If there is no action class, it is action support class is default class. Okay, we'll take a break.